Annette Funicello is that smiling, spunky Mouseketeer. And as our story last Monday on Annette's brave battle with multiple sclerosis showed, she hasn't lost her spark.
Annette Funicello, Disney's beloved princess and the quintessential American sweetheart of the 1960s, once stunned the world by openly embracing her vulnerability, proudly asking for help while seated in a wheelchair. Behind the radiant smile and wholesome image lay a life tightly controlled from the tender age of 12, where love was forbidden, growth stifled, and betrayal cut deep. Though adored by millions, Annette's true struggles were hidden beneath the glittering surface, overshadowed by jealous co-stars and the iron grip of the Disney studio machine. At 70, Annette Funicello finally named 5 actors she hated the most. These painful truths shattered her fairy tale existence. Today, we'll unveil everything. Let's start from the very beginning. Early life and Disney stardom. Annette Joanne Funicello was born on October 22, 1942, in Utica, New York, to Italian-American parents, Joseph and Virginia Funicello. When she was just 4 years old, her family moved to Southern California, setting the stage for her destiny as a cultural icon. Growing up in a modest household in the Los Angeles suburb of Studio City, Annette exhibited early signs of talent and poise. She began studying dance at the age of 5 and performed at local recitals, often captivating audiences with her natural charm and grace. Her early life reflected the quintessential post-war American ideal: a nuclear family, traditional values, and a wholesome suburban upbringing. These elements, combined with her striking looks, positioned her as a natural candidate for Walt Disney's vision of the perfect all-American girl. That opportunity arrived when Annette was just 12 years old. In 1955, Walt Disney launched a new children's television program called The Mickey Mouse Club on ABC, part of his ambitious cross-media empire that blended entertainment and marketing. Disney discovered Annette at a dance recital at the Starlight Theater in Burbank, where she performed "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?" Dazzled by her presence, he personally selected her for the show, which would become a national phenomenon. Out of 24 original Mouseketeers, Annette quickly became the breakout star, eclipsing her peers with a magnetic presence and likability that resonated with American families. She was introduced to millions of viewers in the show's first season, her popularity soaring as she transitioned from background performer to central figure. By 1956, she was receiving more fan mail than any other Mouseketeer, sometimes as many as 6,000 letters a month. Annette's image was carefully curated by Disney, who understood the power of branding before the term was even commonly used. She embodied a very specific kind of idealized girlhood: pure, obedient, modest, and wholesome. To maintain this image, Disney imposed strict limitations on her public and private persona. Her hair had to be styled in a soft, shoulder-length flip that would not suggest vanity or rebellion. Her wardrobe was conservative and demure, and her roles never strayed from the innocent, moral, and cheerful. Even off-screen, her behavior was tightly managed. She was not allowed to publicly date, kiss anyone on camera, or wear clothing that revealed too much skin. These restrictions extended into her teenage years, even as her peers in Hollywood began exploring more daring and adult roles. Despite these limitations, Annette was eager to please and admired Walt Disney, whom she viewed as a father figure. She once said, "Mr. Disney said there was something different about me. I tried to live up to what he saw in me." However, this reverence masked a more complex dynamic. While Disney publicly promoted Annette as the symbol of moral purity, his control over her was extensive and often invasive. He took a keen interest in shaping not only her career, but her decisions and personal life. This dichotomy between Annette's public role as the embodiment of innocence and the private constraints placed upon her was emblematic of Disney's broader strategy. Her image was not only essential for the Mickey Mouse Club, but also for an expanding array of Disney enterprises, record albums, merchandise, fan clubs, and appearances. She was the model of brand loyalty and her face adorned everything from dolls to lunchboxes. Yet, as she grew older, tensions arose. In the early 1960s, Disney reluctantly permitted her to star in a series of teen beach movies for American International Pictures, like 1963's Beach Party and 1964's Muscle Beach Party, but only under the condition that she wear modest swimwear, usually a one-piece instead of the then-popular bikinis, and maintain her clean image. Even these roles, while more playful, were sanitized and safe. In many ways, Annette Funicello was a product of her time, a young woman shaped by the cultural expectations of 1950s America and the calculated strategies of a media mogul who saw her not just as a talent, but as a symbol. She did not rebel, did not scandalize, and rarely questioned the authority above her. Yet behind the polished exterior was a teenager growing up under an enormous weight, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of disappointing Disney, and the longing for a more genuine, less confined experience of youth. Behind the velvet cage, the dark reality. As the most adored Mouseketeer, Annette Funicello's fame sparked jealousy and resentment among her peers, many of whom struggled with their own fading relevance, while Annette's stardom only grew. Behind the scenes of the Mickey Mouse Club, fellow child actors whispered disparaging remarks, branding her a teacher's pet, and accusing her of favoritism due to her closeness with Walt Disney. This bitterness created a toxic atmosphere on set, where camaraderie gave way to silent competitiveness. As she transitioned into teenage roles, the hostility didn't end. It morphed. Older male co-stars, directors, and studio executives often viewed Annette not as a young woman, but as a product to be consumed, adored, and quietly pursued. While she was presented as the wholesome American sweetheart, behind closed doors, she was forced to navigate predatory advances with little support or protection, especially in an era when the concept of safeguarding young actors barely existed. One of the most heart-wrenching chapters in her early adult life involved her short-lived connection with Elvis Presley. In 1957, during the early days of Elvis's superstardom and the height of her Disney fame, the two met briefly through mutual industry connections. There was a mutual curiosity. Elvis admired her charm and voice, while Annette was flattered by his attention. But any potential relationship was immediately squashed. Walt Disney's strict policies prohibited her from associating with figures deemed inappropriate for her image, and Elvis, with his hip-shaking charisma and rebellious air, was considered the epitome of danger to her pristine brand. Studio officials intervened, warning her that any romantic link to Presley could not only jeopardize her contract, but ruin her reputation. Years later, Annette would admit, gently, that she had admired Elvis and thought of what could have been. But she had no choice. Her life, her choices, and even her romantic dreams were dictated by the Disney machine. As her career evolved into the beach movie era of the 1960s, the pressures changed shape but never eased. Though these films offered her the rare freedom to dance, sing, and act in roles closer to her real age, the production environments were not always friendly. She was often the target of veiled insults by co-stars, many of whom were envious of her fame and her unwavering loyalty to her no bikinis clause, enforced by Disney. Her insistence on modesty was mocked as prudish by some. When she fell ill on set due to exhaustion or stress, she was often dismissed as overreacting. In one instance, during a 1965's How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, a co-star joked that she was just looking for attention when she fainted between takes, though she had been running a fever and clearly needed medical rest. The true weight of this erasure became brutally evident in the late 1980s when Annette was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic and degenerative neurological disease. She had begun noticing symptoms in the early part of the decade, such as balance issues, slurred speech, and fatigue. At first, she kept her condition private, fearing public pity, or worse, being dismissed entirely in an industry that was already starting to view her as a relic of the past. In 1992, she finally went public with her diagnosis, not to gain sympathy, but to raise awareness and funding for research into the disease. However, her announcement was met with a troubling mix of compassion and cruelty. While some fans rallied around her, others in the entertainment industry barely blinked. Former co-stars distanced themselves from her, and younger audiences unfamiliar with her Disney legacy dismissed her as washed up. In one particularly cold remark in a 1993 interview, a younger starlet quipped, "Wasn't she the one with the Mickey ears or something? Sad, but I guess everyone fades." Annette's physical decline was slow and merciless. By the mid-1990s, she could no longer walk unaided, and her speech became increasingly impaired. Yet she continued to appear at charity events and even wrote her autobiography, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, in 1994, with Patricia Romanowski, bearing her truth with honesty and grace. But even then, the press coverage often fixated more on her tragic fall rather than her advocacy or courage. The transformation of public perception from a national sweetheart to a sidelined has-been was perhaps the cruelest blow. It revealed how unforgiving fame can be, especially for women who were once adored for their youth and purity. Behind the velvet cage of fame, Annette Funicello had lived a life shaped, controlled, and finally discarded by the very system that once celebrated her. Now, let's expose those who wronged Annette Funicello. A complex relationship, Walt Disney. Annette Funicello's relationship with Walt Disney was one of reverence, gratitude, and unspoken anguish. When she was cast at the tender age of 12 as one of the original Mouseketeers for the Mickey Mouse Club in 1955, it was Disney himself who singled her out from the audition pool at the Burbank studios. She had a magnetic presence he found compelling, more grounded than the others, modest, and endowed with an effortless charm. By all accounts, Walt Disney grew increasingly protective of Annette as the show gained traction, referring to her as "our Annette," and frequently attending rehearsals to observe her personally. She was promoted from ensemble appearances to solo musical numbers. Fan clubs were launched in her name, and her face began appearing on lunchboxes, coloring books, and dolls. Yet behind this constructed image of mutual admiration lay a far more complex truth. Annette became a tightly managed creation, hemmed in by Disney. As the 1950s gave way to the 60s and adolescence faded into womanhood, Annette's every move was still micromanaged by Disney's carefully scripted idea of innocence. She was forbidden to date publicly as a teenager, even after she turned 18 in 1960, under the pretext that it might ruin the fantasy of her being every boy's dream girl. But how can one forbid love? Annette met Paul Anka, a Canadian-born singer and songwriter who rose to fame as a teen heartthrob with hits like Diana and Put Your Head on My Shoulder. His charm and boy-next-door appeal made him a natural counterpart to Annette's girl-next-door persona. The two had a brief romantic involvement during the early 1960s when both were at the height of their early fame. Annette was still under strict contract with Disney, which famously prohibited her from publicly dating or engaging in relationships that might tarnish her carefully maintained, innocent image. The studio and Walt Disney personally intervened whenever rumors of a romance surfaced. When Annette was linked with Paul Anka in the press, Disney summoned her for a serious conversation, emphasizing the importance of keeping her personal life private and away from public scrutiny. Because of this, any relationship Annette might have had with Anka was carefully kept under wraps and never openly acknowledged. Annette's public statements about her early life rarely mentioned dating, and she was known to have been cautious about revealing personal details that could conflict with her Disney-crafted image. Paul Anka, too, did not discuss this rumored relationship in interviews or memoirs in any meaningful way, keeping the matter largely private. Disney's grip extended well into her early 20s, long after she had outgrown the child roles she'd been molded to fit. In 1963, When she starred in Beach Party alongside Frankie Avalon, she was contractually prohibited from wearing a bikini, something that every other actress in the film, including lesser-known newcomers, was allowed to do. The studio insisted she wear a modest one-piece swimsuit, reinforcing the wholesome girl image Disney had built around her. Even though she was 21 and married by 1965, she confided to friends that she felt infantilized by the restrictions, saying she was trapped in pigtails, even when her peers had moved on to more adult, nuanced roles. Directors and producers sometimes pushed for more romantic or mature roles, but Disney's shadow loomed too large. His unofficial decree was simple. Annette could grow older, but she could never grow up. Despite the hurt and creative confinement, Annette never spoke a harsh word publicly about Disney. She credited him with launching her career, and even in her 1994 memoir, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, she referred to him as a second father. But there are subtle moments in her writings and interviews that reveal the toll his mentorship took on her spirit. She described moments where she felt invisible in her own decisions, and how at times it felt as though a puppeteer was pulling all the strings, and I was just smiling through it. Those close to her, including her cousin Ruthie and longtime stylist Barbara Johnson, recall that behind the scenes, Annette struggled with a kind of identity dissonance. Famous and adored, yet perpetually stuck, playing a version of herself she no longer recognized. Emotional fallout. Jack Gilardi. When Annette Funicello married Jack Gilardi on January 9, 1965, in a quiet ceremony at St. Cyril's Catholic Church in Encino, California, it seemed like the perfect union, America's sweetheart tying the knot with a well-connected Hollywood agent. Jack, who worked for the William Morris Agency and represented some of the biggest names in the industry, had managed her career with professionalism and apparent devotion for years. But behind the glamorous facade of public appearances and well-coordinated press releases, cracks had already begun to form in the foundation of their relationship. Annette, who had always yearned for a life beyond the artificial perfection forced upon her since she was a preteen, had hoped marriage would finally grant her a semblance of normalcy. Instead, she found herself still trapped, now under the thumb of a husband whose decisions, though framed as career-savvy, often felt like strategic moves to preserve an image she was desperate to outgrow. The early years of their marriage were spent juggling roles. She starred in a string of teen beach comedies while raising their first child, Gina. Born in 1965, followed by Jack Jr. in 1970, and Jason in 1974. The domestic sphere Annette dreamed of often clashed with Gilardi's insistence that she remain visible, photogenic, and emotionally accessible to a public that didn't want to see her age, much less disappear into motherhood. Friends like Shelley Cole, who visited Annette in her Toluca Lake home in the early 70s, later recalled the emotional toll it took. She never said Jack was cruel, but she always looked tired, like someone torn between roles she couldn't reconcile. Gilardi's behavior wasn't openly aggressive. He wasn't the archetype of the violent or abusive husband. Instead, he was what one former William Morris colleague described as professionally possessive. He rarely allowed Annette to turn down interviews, even when she was exhausted or struggling with anxiety. When she pushed for a brief sabbatical in 1972 to focus on her children, Gilardi arranged for a last-minute endorsement deal tied to her Disney legacy, effectively pushing her back into the spotlight. This strain worsened dramatically in the late 1980s when Annette began experiencing the mysterious neurological symptoms that would later be diagnosed as multiple sclerosis. She struggled with balance issues during public appearances and once fell backstage at a Disney anniversary event in 1987. At first, Gilardi dismissed her concerns, attributing the symptoms to stress or fatigue. According to private letters shared decades later by a family friend, Annette felt embarrassed and unheard by the man who had once vowed to protect her. When her diagnosis became official in 1989, the response was largely logistical. Jack arranged for medical consultations and helped manage media strategy, but emotionally, he remained distant. It was like he was her PR guy, not her husband, a close friend later said. While he publicly stood beside her during her 1992 announcement, many noticed a conspicuous absence of intimacy or comfort between them during that difficult press conference. The emotional fallout from years of such compartmentalized support eventually culminated in their divorce in 1981, long before her diagnosis. Annette rarely spoke about the split, offering only the vague explanation that sometimes things drift apart. However, those in her inner circle have long believed that the marriage eroded under the weight of Annette's unmet emotional needs and Gilardi's obsession with optics and control. Even after the divorce, Jack remained involved in parts of her professional life, particularly those tied to licensing and royalties, an entanglement that often frustrated Annette. In her 1994 memoir, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, she treated the subject of their marriage with measured restraint, focusing on her children rather than on her ex-husband. Still, there are glimpses of regret. She wrote wistfully about wanting to be seen as more than a product, and how, in the quiet of the night, she sometimes wondered what life would have felt like if someone had told me I was enough, even when the cameras weren't rolling. But that's not all. Jealousies and competitiveness. Mouseketeers. On the surface, the Mickey Mouse Club, which premiered on October 3, 1955, appeared to be a wholesome haven of friendship, smiles, and synchronized routines. Yet behind the cheerful curtain of matching sweaters and singing Mouseketeers, a more complicated emotional reality often lurked. Annette Funicello, who joined the show at just 12 years old, after being discovered by Walt Disney himself at a dance recital at the Starlight Bowl in Burbank, quickly became the standout star of the group. She was beloved by audiences almost instantly, receiving more fan mail than any other Mouseketeer, sometimes exceeding 6,000 letters a month. While this adoration earned her the admiration of Disney executives, it also created subtle ripples of resentment among her fellow performers. Annette never publicly named names, but she hinted in her later years that the environment behind the scenes was more tense than the show portrayed. In private recollections shared with friends and noted briefly in her 1994 memoir, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes, she admitted that some Mouseketeers treated her differently once it became clear she was the studio's favorite. While the show had a team-oriented image, with roll calls and choreographed camaraderie, backstage was often another matter. Some Mouseketeers, like Darlene Gillespie, who was initially positioned as a potential lead, found their roles shrinking as Annette's popularity exploded. Darlene, a strong singer and dancer from Glendale, had been on the show since the pilot and was often frustrated by the sudden shift in attention toward Annette, especially since Disney gave her a solo segment in the second season titled Annette, which no other Mouseketeer received. This favoritism was not just imagined. Walt Disney personally oversaw Annette's career, often giving direct instructions to writers and directors to feature her more prominently. During rehearsals at the Walt Disney Studios lot in Burbank, there were instances where other cast members were asked to step aside or reblock scenes to accommodate Annette's presence. One former crew member, Bill Walsh, who worked as a production assistant during the first 2 seasons, later mentioned that even among the adults, the hierarchy was evident. This dynamic caused subtle divisions among the Mouseketeers. Boys like Lonnie Burr and Bobby Burgess remained generally friendly toward her, and Annette considered both to be among the few with whom she shared a genuine, easy rapport. But with others, tensions simmered. Some of the girls gossiped about Annette's curvy figure, which began developing earlier than many of the others, drawing even more attention to her. During a rehearsal, a fellow Mouseketeer deliberately misled her about a routine's choreography, resulting in Annette being out of step during the first take. While the error was quickly corrected and reshot, those who witnessed it saw the moment as indicative of the subtle sabotage that sometimes played out under the radar. As the original Mickey Mouse Club ended in 1959, and the Mouseketeers dispersed into different career paths, Annette maintained warm relationships with a few castmates, often reconnecting with Bobby Burgess and Cubby O'Brien for Disney anniversary events. But the emotional residue of those early tensions lingered. When asked in a 1987 People magazine interview whether the Mouseketeers were as close as they appeared, she responded carefully, "We were a team, and we cared about each other. Most of the time." She paused before saying the second part. This hesitation spoke volumes. Manipulation at its peak. American International Pictures executives. The era of the early 1960s was a turning point, not only for youth culture in America, but also for Hollywood's approach to teen stars and the kinds of images studios pushed on them. Among the most vivid examples of this tension was Annette Funicello's fraught relationship with American International Pictures, or AIP, the studio behind the wildly popular Beach Party film series. The studio executives and producers exerted enormous pressure on Annette to shed her wholesome Disney image and embrace a more overtly sexualized persona. When Annette transitioned to the Beach Party films, starting with Beach Party, she entered a very different world. AIP was an independent studio known for exploiting current trends and youth culture, often with a far less restrained approach to sexuality and behavior. Founded in 1954 by James H. Nicholson and Samuel Z. Arkoff, AIP specialized in low-budget, high-turnover movies targeted at teenagers and young adults. Their Beach Party series, beginning in 1963 and running through the decade, was hugely successful, capturing the carefree, rebellious spirit of surf culture. But behind the scenes, the studio's executives were intent on pushing Annette and the other young actors toward more provocative, sexualized portrayals that clashed sharply with her Disney upbringing and personal values. The pressure began as soon as Annette signed with AIP for Beach Party. Studio executives insisted that she wear bikinis and other revealing outfits, something that went against her long-standing promise to Walt Disney to avoid overtly sexualized attire. According to sources familiar with the production environment at Santa Monica and Malibu locations, wardrobe fittings were tense affairs, with Annette repeatedly pushing back against attempts to expose her more than she was comfortable with. One producer allegedly told her, "The kids want to see you as a grown woman now, not a little girl anymore." Behind the scenes, executives exercised subtle but firm control, using contractual leverage and psychological pressure to coerce Annette into compliance. Scenes that could have portrayed her with more depth or emotional nuance were often cut or rewritten to highlight physical appeal and flirtatiousness. In Bikini Beach, reports from crew members indicated that several of Annette's musical numbers and solo scenes were shortened or reassigned to other cast members because she refused to wear the more revealing two-piece swimsuit the producers wanted her to wear. Instead, she compromised with a modest one-piece suit, but the tension lingered. Studio heads were known to express frustration openly, complaining that Annette's resistance threatened the commercial formula they had perfected. This push-pull dynamic created an atmosphere of constant conflict and emotional strain for Annette. In letters and interviews shared privately with friends and colleagues decades later, she described feeling trapped between two worlds: the protective, controlled innocence of Disney's domain and the exploitative, profit-driven demands of AIP executives. Professional conflicts also arose from the way AIP executives favored certain male leads, particularly Frankie Avalon and Annette's co-star in the Beach Party films. Studio heads frequently deferred to Avalon's opinions, reinforcing a hierarchy that left Annette marginalized, both on-screen and behind the scenes. The environment created by AIP executives also exacerbated personal challenges for Annette. During the filming of Beach Blanket Bingo, she was pregnant, a fact she sought to keep discreet while requesting accommodations from the studio. While initially sympathetic, the executive's attitude shifted. Annette was sidelined in several scenes, her screen time reduced, and her presence minimized in promotional materials. This professional sidelining, paired with ongoing pressures to conform to a hyper-sexualized image, compounded her emotional distress. But that's not all. Other actors and industry members who wronged her. Annette's career was complicated by tensions with several male colleagues. Actor and producer John Ashley, known for his roles in the Beach Party films, viewed her as competition at AIP and often lobbied to reduce her roles in favor of his own, creating a strained working environment. Around the same time, Bob Denver, best known as Gilligan, made dismissive backstage comments about Annette's talents between 1964 and 1966, feeding a quiet industry narrative that undermined her credibility beyond her Disney persona. James Darren, the charming singer-actor from Gidget, also posed challenges. Though their on-screen chemistry seemed friendly, behind the scenes, Darren often asserted his status as the more established star. In one 1963 NBC rehearsal, he reportedly dismissed Annette's input, creating tension that producers had to manage. Annette also faced pressure from within her own camp. Agent Herb Jaffe, active in the early 60s, encouraged her to take on adult-themed roles, clashing with her wholesome image and personal discomfort. At Universal Pictures, producer Leonard Goldstein viewed her mainly as a Disney product, limiting her opportunities for mature roles. Even on variety shows like The Danny Kaye Show or The Dinah Shore Chevy Show, producers booked her for musical segments, but avoided offering her more diverse acting parts. Despite these setbacks, Annette remained resilient. She learned early that fame came with hidden costs, especially for young women. Though often treated as sweet and harmless, she endured subtle betrayals by colleagues, agents, and industry figures. Yet, she refused to be bitter. Instead, Annette's quiet strength turned her experience into a story not of victimhood, but of perseverance. Behind the Hollywood smiles and glitter, she carved out her identity, asserting herself with dignity and grace in an industry that often tried to silence her. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.